Maybe thanks to what AI has potentially done to us and how, it's made us rethink some things. But definitely the conversations of provenance and trust and authenticity were there. That was a huge takeaway. And it was definitely inspirational to know that these words were no longer seen as something, as eruditious or sort of over there. It was part and was normalized with everybody. That was impactful.
Welcome back to the Damn Right podcast. I'm Chris Lasinick, your host and CEO of the best damn consulting company in the business, AVP. Today, we welcome John Hordisky back to the podcast, once again serving as our roving field reporter on all things damn. John is just back from the OnDAM conference in Paris and is here to give us the inside scoop on the event. If you're not familiar with OnDAM, it's a conference that is put on by the French company Activo. The conference has been happening for 4 to 5 years now, and as you'll hear, is gaining greater and greater attention, especially in the European marketplace. Since we know no one likes going to Paris, we took one for the damn team and joined in so we could come back and tell you about it. Without further ado, let's jump into my conversation with John. And remember, damn right, because it's too important to get wrong.
This is their 5th year, actually. Did not realize it had been going for that long. So, it's their 5th conception. They've changed venues over the years. This venue was right in the center of Paris, right beside the first district, first arrondissement. So right in the center. This beautiful location called Les Halles, the beautiful glass building. And the venue was awesome. It had like an actual theater, a proper theater, raised seating, massive screen at the back. So when people present their slides, and those events, Chris, where sometimes it's like, I can't see. You could see everything. And it was gorgeous. And obviously with the professional theater, you get professional sound and lighting. It was gorgeous. So every time there was presentations, you could see it and you could hear things so well. That just made it much more immersive, to be in a theater to see something like this. And singular track, sort of 2 tracks, but most of it was in the one single track. And when those were not going on, there was a side workshop room where you could see sort of, quieter sessions, case studies. And it was a lovely room with sofas and comfy chairs and just really comfortable.
So I have to say, though, it could be funny to someone listening to describe the aesthetics, but you have to think, if you're someone that maybe you haven't been to a conference for a while, think back to sitting under oppressive fluorescent lights and bad screens where you can't see stuff. I mean, I just say, it really does make a huge difference in the conference experience. So yeah.
It does make a difference. And I don't know, you and I have talked about this in the past, but there was actual natural light. There was glass windows. Like, you could see outside, and it just made it that much more humane and comfortable, I suppose. But then, to further describe sort of the surroundings of it, they had a coffee bar, and which turned into a wine bar.
This is very French. This is very French.
Well, it's just civilized as well, because who doesn't want a quick espresso or something, during an event, but then in the afternoon, red or white wine. I just think that's a lovely way to have a great conversation with somebody. You get a glass, go to a corner. So the setting and the surroundings were incredible. And of course, any conference is only as good as the people there. And there were some incredible people. Obviously, a lot of French nationals were there, but then you had Germans, British, even some Americans and Canadians had come over. So a good international mix for the room.
And maybe remind us, who puts on the OnDAM conference?
So this is a shout out to Frédéric at Activo. It's their organization who puts this event on. Again, they've been doing it. So huge shout out to Fred for putting this event on. I'm sure he and his team worked 26 hours a day to put this on. It's a big mix, and they did a great job. And he and the team were all there, participating in many different ways, whether it's, coordinating a session, chairing or moderating, to doing behind the scenes stuff. And again, professional photographers. It was being video recorded the whole time. It had translation services. It was a really professionally
So multilingual event.
And sometimes people would assume like when you go to a different country, you'll not be able to participate, because with the live translation services, it was about a 70-30 mix, 70% en français, 30 in English, but you could still participate because you were getting the translation services. That was a big deal. Really well done.
That's great. So tell us, like about how many people that were there? Do you have any sense of like what types of folks from what types of industries were there? Who was represented? What'd that look like?
So I think the stats, and Frederic can correct me afterwards, I suppose, but looking at about 300 people in person, but then it was also, broadcast online. So there was about 100 and something in addition to that who were participating, watching it as it was being streamed live. And it had the regular mix, healthy mix of DAM practitioners, people, end users who are actually participating, working in DAM managers, product managers. But then it also had a healthy mix of the vendors as well participating in the event. So it had the traditional mix of both, end users and vendors at the same time.
That sounds like a great audience. So tell us a little bit about who are the presenters. You were involved in, I think, a couple, maybe more presentations. Tell us a little bit about the subject matter.
So I participated in two. The first one being on governance, beyond DAM governance that powers your life cycle, and that was great because not only did this panel, but there was two other presentations on governance. So I had some stats. In total, three presentations on governance, two presentations on trust and authenticity. That's incredible. Two on C2PA, a subject I know is very dear to your heart, and then one on change management. But the one I was on governance, it was very much, definitional. What is it? How does it work in your organization? What are the roles around it? What could it look like? And it was great. A lot of people definitely, it was a topic of mine for many to say, as we mature in our organization, we may have had DAM for years. It's integrated into potentially a PM, a PLM, other things. How actually do you govern it, and who could be responsible for that? The second one I was a part of, it was on, of course, subject of my dearness, and that is metadata. And that was actually metadata for content authentication and traceability integrity in the AI era. Now, definitely AI was a theme for many of the presentations. This one definitely skewed to, okay, so AI is happening. We see what's out there with our brands, whether, it is product design and or potentially the images that go out. But do we trust what we're seeing? Is it authentic? What is provenance? And these are words that we generally don't hear at conferences enough. And I was sure happy to hear that. And it was a great presentation because we were able to say, okay, so if you are looking at the future, how does one sort of provide a good defense system going forward? Potentially use the C2PA. And many people in the room, hands up, tell me more. I've never heard the term. Tell me more. Is this something? And that was lovely to hear because, like in any good event, if there's an educational component and people can walk away taking just one thing away, the fact that many people walked away thinking, okay, C2PA, how do I use it? What do we need to do? What do I look for more information on? So that was great.
Do you have a sense of like the types of folks in the room? Was there a range as far as like maybe positions? I mean, were these digital asset managers, archivists? Was it directors of marketing? What would that look like?
Yes, and more. So it was that the proper mix of those who are sort of day-to-day DAM managers. There were archivists, librarians, but there was also like senior product manager folk that were within the marketing departments who had many different things to look at, as DAM was one of them. The other thing I saw, which I don't see very often at conferences, but, tip of the hat for everyone else. Let's get more of this. And that was sort of a legal perspective. And the one session itself, and I want to call out, it was called AI Generation and Content Authenticity and How Brands Relate to It. And it was delivered by Dr. Alessandra Sala, who is the chair of the AI Multimedia Authenticity Collaboration in the EU. Incredible conversation.
Love that.
She spoke beside the individual, and his name is Paul Mehdi and he's the head of AI and apps at Moet Hennessy. So it was like this wonderful theoretical, here's what the world is looking like. Here's the problems we're seeing out there thanks to AI in terms of provenance, trust, authenticity, and then countered that with, or sort of assembled with, Moet Hennessy talking about some of the things that they are trying to do going forward. They realize the challenges and they're speaking to say, okay, we know what is out there. Here's what we are doing ourselves to sort of live in this AI world. Incredible conversation.
What about geographic representation? Obviously, it's in Paris, France, so I'm going to assume it was mostly European audience. But what was the spread? How much could you tell where folks were coming?
Definite French nationals were this was an event for it's for the world, but definitely held in Paris. The majority were French nationals, but then again, I saw people from Germany, definitely Britain, other sort of regions in the European Union, as well as from Americans and Canadians came over as well. So yeah, international mix. And the other, but I wanted to say one of the other big sessions that I was impressed with, and that is, and again, it's sort of a theme of the conference, and I think a theme of DAM itself. And you and I had just been to New York City and seen some of the topics. And the one topic that I really enjoyed was showing like the maturity of the industry, and that was on 3D CGI technology with Moe Hennessy talking about workflow. And they spoke with Fluid 4, their tech provider, on how they're using 3D. And I think that is just something more and more people need to talk about. It was one of the busiest sessions in terms of people looking, and of course, gorgeous imagery and the product design of what's going on, and people realizing that is a potential of what we can do in our organization, but how it integrates with the DAM. Fantastic. It's available online to rewatch again, but very impactful session.
Oh, that's great. So those sessions are all being recorded and made available after the fact. That's great.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
And it was free to attend. Do I have that right? Was that also true?
It was free to attend. That's one of the big takeaways for I think many people, myself included, that is a free event. And how many times can you remember sort of free events with the caliber of presentations and the people participating? That's impressive. So again, well done for Activo for putting on something like that.
Was this all kind of a symposium sitting in a room with presentations? Were there vendor booths? Like what did that look like?
There was the main theater where the bigger presentations were being held, a workshop room on the side, and then they had a vendor room situated right beside where one would assemble to sort of have coffee or nibble throughout the day. So it was sort of a traditional sense of speaking space, symposium sort of space, and then vendors to the side. There's a very fluid movement of getting around the room again where the vendors were. It's situated with, again, natural glass windows with that light pouring in. The weather was cooperative for a little bit of the days, and it just made for a very lovely space to walk through and participate and meet new folk.
If you're enjoying this conversation and us bringing the world of DAM to your doorstep through the Damn Right podcast, please take a moment to follow or subscribe to Damn Right on YouTube or your podcast platform of choice. It helps other people who care about DAM find the show, and it lets you know when new episodes are being released. And if there's someone in your network who'd appreciate this discussion, please share it with them. Word of mouth makes a huge difference. And if you're in the market for a DAM, whether you're just starting to explore or deep into vendor comparisons, we put together a free masterclass on everything you need to know about choosing a DAM and making sure you get it right. It's based on 20 years of experience helping organizations choose and implement DAM platforms. You can find it at bit.ly/yourdamnchoice. That's bit.ly/yourdamnchoice. Now back to my conversation with John. So I think you've touched on some of this already, but I wonder if there's more to say about, like, if you're going to have one or two key takeaways from the event, what would you say?
I mean, here we are. DAM's matured. It's part of there. But it was not even a but. It was exciting to see that the evolution of DAM, more than just its integral part in the ecosystem, to involve such things as 3D and that type of sort of structure. And I think more people now need to start figuring out in all industries where 3D could play into. Fashion retail for sure, luxury brands, but there's other places, furniture design where people could think about 3D design. That I thought was a wonderful evolution and sort of maturity of industry. But the other one that I sort of walked away with is that the conversations around words that are important to you and I and others, but things like trust and provenance, words that actually were defined in conversations. And it wasn't sort of eruditious or scholarly in the sense of, a professor would say those words, to which I remember my professor saying those words, but it actually had meaning for individuals. And I think that was a huge takeaway, was that it was normalized and people understood it. And it may be thanks to what AI has potentially done to us and how, it's made us rethink some things. But definitely the conversations of provenance and trust and authenticity were there. That was a huge takeaway. And it was definitely inspirational to know that these words were no longer seen as something, as eruditious or sort of over there. It was part and was normalized with everybody. That was impactful.
Those are great points. As you are talking, it's just making me think that it's so true that, amongst our customers that we work with, 3D is ever more present. We're doing a lot more things with 3D. Trust and authenticity is a conversation amongst our customers, and I would say that those topics have largely been underrepresented. So it's great to hear that they had some representation here, because I do think that if they're not in the conferences, the conferences are a failure of falling behind the reality. So glad to hear that was there.
Well, and Frederic started the whole event. I mean, he did start it with a hip hop dancer thing, which was a lovely way to start a conference. But he did sort of a really interesting sort of state of the nation of DAM, and how it's more than what it was. Way back in the day, it was that single source of truth, which it still is, but it was over there, and now it's over here, and it participates in so many more things. He went into how the media has sort of taken AI, and he went through the Coca-Cola ad, which many people have been discussing in the press. But he brought it into such a way of like looking back to the audience, sort of saying, "What are you doing? How are you participating? Are you prepared?" And it was a lovely setup, because then throughout the next 3 days, we heard those things like governance, change management, trust, provenance, authenticity. It really sort of, it was a foundation for us to know what we were going to be talking about for 2 days. That was incredible.
How does the dancer fall into that? Like, I got lost there. Maybe I went somewhere else. I don't know, but I'm like, wait, hip hop dancer. Okay, and then what?
In the place the theater in which we had, it's actually a space that is sometimes used by a hip hop educational institute. So they, to start off the event, he brought the dancers
That's
in,
awesome.
and with some awesome hip hop music, they kicked it off, and the crowd was clapping and standing. One gentleman came up and participated. I'm like, this is great.
I'd like to see Frederic do some hip hop dancing. That'd be fun. No, that's great. That's funny. I went to Fiat IFTA is an organization. I went to a conference years ago, but it was in Amsterdam, and it's what you're describing sounds so similar. It was like everything, like the aesthetics, but they also had like this event with these like ribbon dancers, people, the acrobatics and stuff. It's very European. I don't know. Yeah, we got to really step up our game in the U.S. here. Well, let's say North America. I'll bring the Canadians in with us. We all collectively have to step up our game on the conference.
Well, it certainly set it off. It made the energy was right from the beginning, right? It was exciting. It was like, okay, but now let's talk about some serious issues.
Yeah,
right?
It takes you out of your like day to day. You're not just going right into like, let me drink as much coffee as possible, sit in this seat, and like hear people talk about the stuff I'm doing every day. All right. Well, those are some interesting takeaways. Any kind of hot takes? And when I say that, I mean like bold statements made about what's happening or where we're going or anything like that, or was it pretty mellow on that front?
I love the idea of a hot take, and I'm going to say that in 2026 we're going to hear a lot more about trust, authenticity, and C2PA. And could be a prediction as well as a hot take, and maybe that's two of the same thing. But even before the conference started, just a few days before, there is a thing known as the EU Artificial Intelligence Act. And in fact, the EU, body that sort of sponsors and coordinates this, it actually has paused a little bit in implementation due to some of the things that are currently happening right now. And in 2026 and 2027, we have new legislation coming in with the United States, two of them actually. One is the Transparency and Frontier Artificial Intelligence Act, and the other one is the California AI Transparency Act. There's going to be a lot of movement happening in the next year as to what can and cannot be done. And similarly, remember the days when GDPR was rolled out? People are like, do I have to participate in this? Well, yes, you do. Well, similarly, at this point in time, it's happening. And I think a lot of people are going to go, oh, wait a minute, there is legislation. How does me and my brand and the people participating in that with those digital assets, how do we participate in this? And I think that's really going to be a theme going forward, because we actually have legislation behind this. So it forces those discussions again of provenance, trust, and authenticity. I do think that's a hot take and a takeaway going forward.
Was there anything that you feel like wasn't discussed that should have been? I mean, I don't hear you saying that. I suspect the answer may be no, but I'm just, always interested to hear like what wasn't being talked about that maybe should have been.
Well, I'll have a little play on that, because one of the things I said coming, you and I had just been to a conference 2 months ago in New York City. And one of the things I walked away from that saying, oh, I wish there was more discussion on change management. Well, here at this event, they did, but I want to hear more of that, because people had hands up and this discussions were like, how do I do this actually? Whether the dam is matured or not, the idea of change management in a world where AI is impacting it and now potentially legislation, how does one do this? In the 3D presentation, they involved a little bit of discussion on, the change management aspects of the workflow design. And I do want to hear more about change management going forward. I think don't get enough of it.
So I'll throw out an implicit hot take. It's just hit me.
Uh-oh.
Do Europeans have a bigger appetite for or greater capacity to stomach topics that our Americans or North Americans might think of as boring? Governance, change management, the hard stuff, right? Do we just like to look at toys and like get excited about features, or I don't know, just hot off the press, literally a hot take? Do you think, or is that stepping too
Do I
far?
respond or
Yeah,
do
I
I
want to
just
know.
let
What do
that
you
go?
think? What do you think?
I think, well, it's been discussed many times over. I think Europe is ahead of us in North American society in terms of just let alone from like mobile technology, governance, those type of things. And I do think they are ahead of us, and that it's a large amount of people squished into a fairly small space. They need to figure out how to get along with each other. And I think they are ahead of us in terms of considering these types of things. So they do stomach it and they do talk about it. And again, walking away from an event where the word provenance was mentioned so many times, that's incredible. That's awesome. We in North America need to think about these things a little bit more. We're distracted by other stuff, but I think we need to pull some of these things into our conversation, hopefully in 26.
Hopefully these two, and of course it's not just these two, there's all over the world. Hopefully there's pushes and pulls that collectively take us all in the right direction. Some of us are pushing, some of us are pulling, some of us are just grabbing our hair and screaming. There's all sorts of reactions going on. So I wonder, though, you mentioned Damn New York, having been there just not too long ago. So, and we don't want to cast shade on anybody. We're not looking to, promote anybody, but two events happened in fairly close proximity, different continents. Just curious, how would you compare and contrast the two events?
It's almost like a parent trying to decide which child they like better or something, which you'll never answer. As a parent, I would definitely, and you have actually asked me this last week when I was there, I would have said the same thing as I'm saying now. The energy was high. The energy was there. The conversations. Why do we go to conferences? To network, to meet people, to have good discussions. That was strong. And the level of discussion, even though some of it was en français, the translations, you still got it. And people were talking about it after the end of the session. They would go have a coffee or a glass of wine. That energy level was high the whole time. That is something I want to see again and again when I see an event. So yeah, higher energy for sure.
What was one of the things that I always find interesting, the way you describe it, it sounds a little bit like other conferences I've been to that are maybe like more driven from the user base. They come with a little bit more passion. It's like driven, the folks that are in the trenches are the ones that are really driving the event. I'm not saying that's the case here, although maybe it is. I don't know, but it just has that sort of energy, that passion, that excitement. It just makes me wonder, the presentations, like what was your sense? Were these vendor driven? Were they user driven? Was it a mix? What'd that look like?
It was a mix, but definitely skewed higher to user driven for sure. Because you look at the topics that as I went through earlier in terms of the topics you were seeing, they were definitely user driven. Now, definitely the workshop room to the side with the comfy sofas, etc. There were vendors demonstrations, but it wasn't just here how to use my tool. It was here how to use it in this way to do these things. It was very much more meaningful to see those presentations, but definitely as a whole, user-led, user-driven, for sure.
That makes sense. I wonder if that is a discrepancy between the two events. Well, it's just, earlier I made the comment, oh, that's great to hear that this was at the conference because that's what we're hearing with our customers. And that could be the natural conclusion or evolution or outcome of user-driven content. Because maybe, Henry Stewart is not exactly that structure. It's a different structure. And so that leads to different topics, which maybe could be speculation, pure speculation. Who knows, but could be a reason for the difference as well.
Well, and it was nice to end an event. When you conclude an event, it's like, good to see you. But it was like, can we talk again in a few weeks? Let's talk about these things. Can we get together on a phone call? I can't wait till next year because, with things like changes in legislation, et cetera, there was an actual community participation that I don't see very often. And again, to walk out of an event energized and excited, that's very meaningful
Did you have a
in
sense that the
2025.
community of people gathered here are a ongoing community that has a persistent presence, or is this the first time, or maybe they only come together around OnDAM maybe or something? I'm just curious. Does this community of DAM exist outside of this event, you think, or not?
A lot of people do look forward to this event as like the event of the year. That was definitely, I talked to a few people, French nationals, and even Brits and others. They say like this is the event because it is such a community. So there is this singular event, but you ask a good question, and I'm not too sure. Like in the interim between now and next November, how much there is being done between there and then. Obviously, online discussions are one way in which to participate, but there is nothing like a live group in-person meeting to really stimulate discussion.
And I asked just because we see so much fragmentation, right? I'm wondering, do these people, the DAM community has fragmented. Folks are going to different conferences with different focuses. And I think I'm just curious, I wonder what that community looks like. Is this a group of folks that are largely getting together in other ways, virtually or in person throughout the year or not? And I assume, now I saw a lot more about OnDAM this year than I remember ever seeing before. It felt bigger to me. I don't know if it was just, the algorithm and LinkedIn and stuff feeding me things, or because we were present with you there. But what do you know? Was it bigger this year? Is this just kind of turned into something more?
No, so again, it's their fifth time doing this. This was the biggest event. So it was bigger. And I do believe, regardless of the algorithm, I think there was much more attention because, like anything, as it grows, it gets more people. I think this, as their fifth sort of annual event, it did have much more people. And it wasn't just, French nationals. It was the European Union, even North America were attending. It was a big event. I can't wait for what happens in 2026.
So there's plans for a 2026 OnDAM, I presume.
Correct.
Yeah.
It may be at the same location. We did talk about that. It might be moved a little. Fred is always looking for the best. And while this venue was great, I think he might have other plans, but definitely 2026 will be happening.
Good to know.
Yes.
Good to know. So an event to put on people's calendars, especially if you're in the US, you want a nice little trip on top of a great conference.
Correct.
That makes it extra nice. But no matter where you are in the world, it's something to consider for 2026.
Mhm.
I'm certainly compelled by the description. I think I'd like to go next year as well. Is there anything we didn't touch on that you think is important to mention, or do you feel like we've hit on all?
Well, I'm always looking for trends and new ideas and topics, and certainly some of the stuff that was trickling throughout many of the discussions was something that you're quite familiar with as well, and that is the topic of AI agents. And I do think as we move into 26, 27, we're going to hear a lot more about that. I think 24, 25, when it was first being discussed, it was seen as, I don't understand, tell me more. But now many of the DAM vendors are actually participating in AI with AI agents. And I think that's quite exciting. It was mentioned a few times at the conference here. And I think we are going to hear a little more of that going forward because it's now realized. I would love to see some case studies. I'm looking at you, vendors and conference organizers. I want to see people who used it, how they've used it, how well has it done, any success, ROI metrics behind that. I would love to see a little bit more about that. Plus, the other theme that I, take away or sort of from this event was, and we've talked about this before, and whether you want to call it postmodern DAM or something, but it's that human aspect to what you do with DAM. And maybe it is because of what's happened with AI. I don't know. Yes or no. That's a whole different discussion that we could have over a glass of wine. But it has made us realize the humans participate so much in this, whether it's the digital asset manager, the metadata librarian, but also that governance is the human aspect for that, I think is really well done. And I think that's something to consider for 26, 27.
And that pulls it, those things all come together in interesting ways. You've got AI agents and the fear of, people being replaced in their jobs. You've got a changing landscape of how digital asset management functions, which brings in change management,
Yeah,
which brings in AI, which brings in governance, which brings it all
absolutely.
together. And there's certainly a lot of work to do, a lot of things to discuss. It's a fast moving picture that it will be important to keep a finger on the pulse of.
And I would also shout out then as well, when we do think of conferences going forward, make it engaging. What they did at OnDAM is I walked out with a big smile of what was happening, how they did it. They even at one session, they had a live feed to Toronto Metropolitan University and had some of their students and faculty with them on the screen. I'm like, okay, we know it can be done, so let's go do it more often.
Try some different new things. Yeah, yeah,
It
yeah.
was so exciting to see that Dr. Reem El Assaleh was there with her students, live feed, talking. Like, come on, this is 2025. We can do this, right?
All right. So, final question. You're a music man. What was the last song you added to your favorites playlist?
I love this. I have two. Obviously, it makes sense. Edith Piaf, Non, je ne regrette rien. Makes sense. Iconic artist flying into Paris, listening to that song. Your heart pounds. Edith Piaf. I mean, my goodness. And then secondly, at one of the events, as it was closing after, great discussions and cocktails, Norwegian electronic band by the name of Hubba Bubba Club with the song Fiat, which translates into mountain, was playing, and it was a chill, good vibe to end the day. Lots of hugs. And then we'll see you at the conference the next day. So Hubba Bubba Club was the other one.
All right. I'm going to have to ask you for links to those if you have them.
I
Okay,
will.
great, great.
I
We'll
will
add them to the
provide you with
playlist.
links.
Wonderful. Well, John, thank you for being our field reporter from all over the world, I should say. Thanks for the great insights and takeaways. It was really fun to catch up and hear all about it.
Thank you.
All right.
My pleasure.
If you're enjoying this conversation and us bringing the world of DAM to your doorstep through the Damn Right podcast, please take a moment to follow or subscribe to Damn Right on YouTube or your podcast platform of choice. It helps other people who care about DAM find the show, and it lets you know when new episodes are being released. And if there's someone in your network who'd appreciate this discussion, please share it with them. Word of mouth makes a huge difference. And if you're in the market for a DAM, whether you're just starting to explore or deep into vendor comparisons, we put together a free masterclass on everything you need to know about choosing a DAM and making sure you get it right. It's based on 20 years of experience helping organizations choose and implement DAM platforms. You can find it at bit.ly/yourdamnchoice. That's bit.ly/yourdamnchoice.